It's Professor Del Russo, and now we're going to begin something quite substantive, and that is the ground rules. We are knee deep into the forensic interview now, and we're going to move on to a stage that's vital quality forensic interview. Now, a few years back, there was not complete consensus in our field about introducing ground rules and discussing them with children. Was the position of child first finding words that simply by providing an advisory at the beginning of the interview to the child wasn't very effective and it wasn't very efficient. It took time and it really didn't pay dividends. The recommendation was that when the issue arose during the interview, when it presented itself, that was the time to advise the child, to provide that instruction or ground rule. And in nearly every interview, all of these issues arise. So for example, if there was a point where the child corrected the interviewer, that's when you advise the child that that's important and thank you for correcting me. And if I make a mistake again, it's okay to correct me. That was found to be more effective. But now we have research that tells us pretty emphatically, and there was some early research on this for sure, but it's beyond consensus now, it's best practice to provide that instruction at the beginning and practice it and practice it. And that makes it effective and stickier, and it meets the expectation that Child First Finding Words had, that if you're going to give an instruction, it ought to be sticky, it ought to be effective, it ought to have meaning, it ought to not go in one ear and out the other. And we in Child First Finding Words still recommend that if the situation presents itself, you offer that advisory, you tell the child that it was okay to correct you or not to guess, or it's okay to say, I don't know, those kinds of things if you really don't know as the situation arises. But we also give it on the front end at the beginning during this early phase of the interview process. And Professor Poole describes the research that supports that. So let's take a look at Professor Poole at page 91. That's what's up here on the side of this video cast, page 91 of Professor Poole's chapter 4. The first ground rule that Professor Poole talks about is the advisory not to guess. And she offers some research and science on this issue because don't guess instructions were found to be approximately 98% effective. So this one works and it's an effective one. So we need to make sure that we use it whenever we do a forensic interview. It is, in fact, best practice. So what we mean by don't guess is we want to explain to the child that when we don't know the answer to a question, it's okay to say, I don't know. Now, there's some concern about letting the child know that they can offer I don't know responses when they, in fact, don't know. Because sometimes, and more likely in a forensic interview of a child where they're making an accusation or informing against someone they know, love, or trust, they may know the answer and be too emotional to discuss it or not want to talk about it for a variety of reasons, including to protect the accused. Those kinds of issues are always relevant in a forensic interview of a child involving intrafamilial abuse, which is most of this stuff. So we want to be mindful of the fact that children can use that I don't know response to avoid answering the question. Nevertheless, it is best practice to encourage the child not to guess and to tell us they don't know. And if you practice it, and if you're vigilant and pay attention to whether the child is telling you they don't know because they actually don't know, or perhaps you get the sense that they were avoiding the issue for some reason, then you can address the emotional issues that are preventing them from expressing themselves about that issue. Poole also points out on this issue, when you do get a non-responsive answer or an unexpected response, that you attempt to clarify, including I don't knows. So if you get that I don't know and you're skeptical of it, if you attempt to clarify the I don't know, you eventually, in most cases, are going to get a response that makes sense or is responsive. So if you take a look at page 91, she discusses that in the center of the page. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about children and practicing the ground rules in a moment. I mentioned before that it's imperative that we practice the advisory, not simply get the child to shake their head, nod, or say yes, or provide some other affirmative response. All of these ground rules require, in order for them to be effective, that we practice it. It doesn't have to be a long-winded practice. And there are some very common scripted ways to do this. You may come up with one that's similar, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And the one that Professor Poole offers, and it's one that Child First Finding Words uses a lot. You ask the child a question where the expected response is, they don't know. Now, sometimes they will answer you, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you ask them a question where the expected response is, I don't know, and the one that's commonly used is, now I want to talk about things that we know and we don't know. What's the name of my dog? I wouldn't say if I were to ask you. I would ask her, simply ask her, Daniela, what's the name of my dog? And the expected response is, I don't know. Now, some children may give you an answer. They may give you an answer for a variety of reasons. They may think you're asking about their dog. They may want to tell you what you should name your dog. They may just think it's a game or want to be silly about it. You need to address that immediately. Whatever the response is, if they say anything other than I don't know. So when a child gives you an unexpected response, like what's my dog's name, and the answer is Harley, you would say to the child, do you really know what my dog's name is? Let's try it again. My sister's name, Daniela, has shown that the child is going to say I don't know most of the time. Well, some children stick to it, and that you deal with separately. But if you communicate with the child and reinforce it and ask the question again in a slightly different way, the child is more likely to tell you, I don't know. And that's important because we're setting the table for the forensic interview, and we want to make sure that it has integrity later on. And we can always point to this as something that enhanced the integrity of the interview.